If you want to get better at recording and mixing, one of the best things you can do is listen to and learn from people who are way better than you and whose work you admire. Hey friends, Graham here from therecordingrevolution.com, and just recently I got to sit down with Grammy award-winning mix engineer Jacquire King, famous for the Kings of Leon records, Modest Mouse, Mutemath, Nora Jones, Tom Waits. This guy is not only an incredible mixer, but he's an incredible recording engineer and producer. He does it all, sees the vision from start to finish, which is a lot of what we're doing in the home studio, creating the songs from start to finish. And a year ago, I got to work with him in person at Mix with the Masters, which was an incredible experience. And I immediately learned two things about Jacquire. One, he is super crazy talented, more than I even imagined. Two, he's a super humble guy. He loves to share, and he just loves music, and that obviously resonates with me, and I think it'll resonate with you. So recently I sat down with him, did an interview so I could bring him on the Recording Revolution and share him with you. In this interview, we unpack Jacquire's mixing in the box approach, and some of the things he talks about and some of the strategies he employs are so different and so interesting and so helpful to you. Tricks like how to get the perfect low-end balance in your mix, especially if you're working in a room where you don't know if the low end is accurate, aka your bedroom studio. I had never heard anyone share this trick before until I heard him share it originally, and I asked him to unpack it in detail in this interview. It's super simple and super helpful. We also talk about why artists and musicians need to view themselves as small business owners, and I love how Jacquire puts it that ultimately great record making isn't about going out making a good, normal sounding record. It's about going and creating something that sounds unique. So my friends, sit back, relax, and enjoy this action-packed interview with the one and only Jacquire King. All right, we're here with Jacquire King. I'm so excited to do this interview because Jacquire is one of those guys that has a heart of a teacher, is excellent at what he does, and I knew he would be perfect to bring on my channel to share with you because he's great at recording and mixing and just sort of does the whole thing and is a musician-centric, focused engineer. And I had the privilege of being able to work with him at Mix with the Masters last year. That's where we met up and just sit under his teaching and learn from him and see how he works. He's a really humble guy, and he loves to share, and he loves to just make music, and I'm all about that. So, Jacquire, thanks for hanging out with us for a few minutes today. Thanks for sharing your time and your wisdom.
Oh, man, thank you very much. I'm honored. Thanks for having me on.
We were talking briefly before the call started that you've got a production company, right? You've got or publishing company. You're developing artists. So
Yes.
obviously you've worked with some big names, but you're trying to seek out new artists that you want to push forward. So can you talk a little bit about what that's like and why you're interested in that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of fun to work with established artists. It's a different recording experience because they're seasoned and they kind of they have experience, and a lot of times everybody's trying to do something new on every album they make.
Right.
I've never really worked with anybody that wants to kind of keep doing the same thing. So when you're doing that with an established artist, someone that's experienced, it's a different sort of experience in that they kind of know the ropes in the studio, and it's some things go a lot easier, and then sort of where the hard work is with an artist like that is that trying to discover what that new version of them is or that current version. So I like that, but then with brand new artists, there's the whole experience of sort of inviting them into like the studio and the process of I'm someone that's an experienced record maker and surround myself with experienced people, and so inviting someone like new and developing into that is just like it's kind of an education for them, so there's a lot of joy in that and helping them discover who they are as an artist at that point in terms of like record making. So I mean that's what's exciting, and then having the opportunity to be able to identify someone and offer them a publishing deal to sort of help facilitate the finances of it and give us a venue to once the recorded music is done that there's an outlet for it. There's an infrastructure to sort of help expose it and place it and sort of do more than just record making. It can be disappointing and hard when you take on a project for not a lot of money, or it's really time consuming. There's a lot of effort that needs to be put into it, and you feel like that you do everything that you possibly can, and you make it as great as it can be, and it's really special, and then that's it. It's just like, then it depends on them, printing up, pressing up records or releasing it or whatever. Then you sort of then you feel like your efforts that's a lot of risk. It's a big roll of the dice. I mean, it's wonderful to make great records, but you also want to feel like that they have a chance to get out there in the world.
I think what's cool and unique about you, Jacquire, and one reason why I wanted to bring you on the Recording Revolution is because so much these days, like, guys at your level are very specialized, and they're just mix engineers. They just bang out mixes, or they just master, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you have your hand in all sorts of things, and what you're just describing is really, it reminds me of Steve Jobs' end-to-end control, the Macintosh. Like, in a way, I'm not comparing you to Steve, because that guy's crazy. He's had his own issues, but like
I have issues, man.
Well, who doesn't? People that are watching this, a lot of times they're making their own music, and they do have to do end-to-end. And what you just said was critical, is that they could write the song themselves, and it could be a great song. Because a lot of my readers are super talented songwriters. They could record it well, and it'd be really well captured, good performances, mixed well. They might even master it themselves well, or get someone to master it, but it sounds good. But when it stops there,
right,
and there's not either a strategy or a budget to distribute it, even as an independent artist, like even just to your small fan base, like even to 1,000 people, if you get 1,000 people to buy your record or download it, if there's no strategy there, then it's just for the sake of making the art, which is valuable, but really art is meant to be shared, because we view art, we hear art, and it's for other people to experience. So what you're describing is, man, how can I have, more control of helping artists go from point A completely to the other end of the spectrum, and make sure they don't just fall off the map. And anyway, that's exactly what my audience is dealing with. They have to do it themselves, though.
Well, I mean, it makes me think about, like, some of the advice I give people starting out, and the reality is like, I've accomplished a great many things, and I'm very grateful for it. But at the same time, I'm not working at a beginning level, and I have a lot of advantages, that luxuries that I have because of the time spent and the things that have gone right. But the reality is, though, is that if I want, the music business is constantly changing, the world is constantly changing. If I want to create opportunities for myself, I need to look at the big picture. And this is sort of my way of looking at the big picture and creating, doing what it is that I love, but trying to create a context and an environment in which I can do all the different things that I love, and not necessarily completely rely on other people to come to me and say, hey, we've signed this artist, we think this is a great artist, what do you think? Do you feel like you want to make a record? I mean, that happens a lot. I mean, that's a big part of my world, but I don't want to I don't want to sit around and wait for someone to ring me up. I have the luxury of that people will call me, and people do email me, and they want me to work with them. But when you're starting out, you don't really have that same luxury. So, I mean, it ties into some of the advice that I give, just in terms of, like, you got to create your own path. You have to be very entrepreneurial. You have to think about the big picture. And even if you do want to specialize in one or a few things, that's fine. You just have to realize how, if you're going to specialize in something, who is it that you need to sort of expose your specialty to? How do you need to you need to think about the big picture and see how you fit into it. And one thing I tell a lot of new people at this, like, getting out of school or whatever, like Nashville, I live in Nashville, and sometimes, this is a writer's town. And I tell the young engineers and producers, it's like, you're at a starting level. Go out and find artists and songwriters that are at a similar level, and help them with their craft. And you form a partnership where you grow together. Because if you should go out and you should identify talent that you believe in, and work to help make recorded works with them, and they'll grow, you'll grow. And then if they what if they get a publishing deal, or if they get a record deal? Well, you may not get to go along for that ride, because a lot of times what happens is they move that artist on to someone that has more experience, or something where they feel like they're going to spend the money and they know that they're going to get a reliable result. But you're exposed to all those people and you
Mm.
learn from the experience, and you can see that, well, hey, I made a good call on that artist and I helped get them started and to a point where someone else believed in them and sort of picked up. And then, so it's an affirmation, but then it's also you're making relationships. It may be a couple years down the road, but that A&R person or that publishing person may say, hey, I've got this artist, and they may think of you and kind of come back to you and say, hey, you know how you did that thing, helped develop, can you do that again? And forming those relationships and all that's important. Or that songwriter that you work with may tell another great songwriter, like, hey, this person helped me do a really great demo. You should go see them. And it's just like you got to be thinking about the bigger picture and how you're a part of it. And so, yeah,
No, that makes a lot of sense.
But yeah.
Well, I mean, because it's what you're describing is that's what's so hard, and the balance is like a guy like me, like I love to do everything myself because I'm just curious about all the processes in it. And so sometimes that's good. Like what you said is you need to be entrepreneurial. And I think a lot of times musicians don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs. And maybe there was a time where you could just be the art creator and someone else would sell your art. But money has to be made if you want to do this for a living, or even if you don't want to do it for a living, if you want to be able to still have the resources to maybe press your next CD or keep up your website costs or whatever, or buy new gear for your studio, there needs to be some transaction. And so these days it's easier than ever for musicians and artists to see themselves as a small little business, and
Yeah.
they have to market themselves. They have to believe in their music and say like, man, my music adds value to people's lives, but how do I get it in their hands? How do I, charge for it? Or do I do live shows and charge for those? And so you have to be entrepreneurial and self-starting. But then I love what you said about finding maybe an area where you're not that strong in and partnering with somebody so that you can say, well, what can I add to this partnership? If there's a songwriter, like you said, if I can bring engineering skills or mixing skills to their songs, maybe I can benefit from their great songwriting, and together we can actually work on better music or achieve a better result. And that takes a lot of humility. And I know I struggle with that sometimes. Like
Yeah.
I could do it okay, but if I did it this far and then passed it off to this guy, he'd probably finish it better or whatever.
I mean, we excel in different ways in different situations, and you have to be realistic. I mean, where in certain situations, yeah, maybe you are the best person to do a particular job, but maybe you're not always, and you have to be willing and able to acknowledge that and sort of be able to identify whoever that is or whatever that is you need to bring in and make space for that. I mean, that, like, to me, that in terms of being a record producer, that's a skill that you need to really have. If you it's a bad idea to think that, and I fell prey to this early on a little bit, is that because, okay, I'm going to be the record producer, I have to be able to do everything. I have to be in total control. Well, and in a way where it's like I need to be able to do it all, or I should do it all, or whatever. That's a mistake, because I'm not the best person to do absolutely everything. Maybe I could get a result, but it would be a certain kind of result. It would be a result only fed from me, and not a collaboration or bringing in other talents. It's good. I mean, I love to know how to do stuff. I can master records. I've done it in the past where I felt like it was dictated by finances or, for whatever reason, I just wanted to do it, or however. And I've mastered records for other people, but I don't sit around mastering all my records. I take it to a specialist. I take it to an expert. Not only is that skill set something that person's using every day, but then they're also an objective opinion.
Sure.
And it kind of like, as you and I have discussed recently, I've been moving towards mixing in the box, and I have talked to Andrew Sheps, I have talked to Richard Dodd, I have talked to Michael Brower, and we have had extensive conversations about all of that stuff. And Richard does a lot of mastering for me, and I am sending him, as I get started on projects, I'm sort of trying to work through this process. I send him something, as an early look at, like, well, what do you think of this in terms of like its result in terms of a mastering job, and kind of getting some feedback. And it's important. I can do great work, but it's not a closed environment. And knowing how to master only it helps me understand what Richard's saying to me, and then so
Exactly.
then I can use that in the job that I'm actually doing, which is mixing.
No, that makes total sense. Like a movie director knowing what a cinematographer does and a set designer does well, so that then they can communicate better, and he can say, "Can you give me this kind of shot?" Even though cinematographer might be better at getting the shot.
Absolutely,
No,
absolutely.
that makes total sense. You kind of took me where I wanted to go. You have been moving in the box in terms of mixing. Traditionally, I know you've. The cool thing about you is you've been on the digital wave for a long, long time,
Yeah.
and so you've had your hand in both, and you've had a cool hybrid approach. But I know we spoke a few months ago, and you said, "Hey, man, I'm actually trying to go more in the box." Just love to hear sort of what the update is on that.
Sure, sure. I feel like a lot of people around me are doing it very successfully. I love the way some people's records sound, and I know that they're done that way. And it's just like, well, I want to learn to do that too. I don't want to be stuck um, in a process that's cumbersome and or whatever. It's like you think about. It used to be that the difference between an analog mix and a digital mix was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's not. The technology has come to the point where you can get an equal job. You can get an equal result. Now, do they sound a little bit different? Yeah, because you're working in a different medium. But the same as a record will sound the same, mix and mastering will sound different on vinyl than it does on a CD. I mean, it's just part of the mechanics of the medium. But one isn't better than the other. I think when I'm mixing all in the box, there's a few things about mixing in a more analog environment that it's like you realize, well, it doesn't sound the same. I kind of miss a little bit of that feeling. But then on the other hand, if you were only in an analog world and having the knowledge that I have about what you can do in the digital world, I think I'd feel the same way.
Mm.
At this point, I don't feel like it's like this one's superior over this one. They're just different.
Yeah.
You can get a great result, and it really is about the result. And it's if you can figure out how to use the tools to get the same sort of emotional result. To me, it's about like finding that emotional place of when a mix feels exciting and it has depth and energy. I mean, sure, frequencies and there's a lot of technical things that go into it, but at the end of it, what music does is it moves us emotionally.
Mm.
And uh, you know, the I think the biggest thing that I'm learning about working in the box is that when I pull up an 1176 plugin, I mean it's a compressor that I know that they're pretty close. Like the analog and the digital equivalent are they function the same,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't. It's not the exact same thing. It's just like you use them slightly different. They behave the same. They sound slightly different. But you kind of have to figure out in the digital world how to, in the same way that I had to in the analog world, figure out what specific pieces of gear hooked up a certain way, and what type of parallel compression or what type of EQ or where I EQ'd or where I compressed, and how you ended up combining it all, how hard you pushed the mix bus on the desk. It's all the same kind of thought process in the box. It's just the tools don't exactly work the same, whereas a certain type of tube compressor in the analog world might have worked well to do a certain type of compression. I just need to find something in the digital world that yields me the same kind of result. Is it the same exact compressor? Most of the time it's not,
Mm.
but sometimes it is. So you just have to sort of like relearn. That's one of the things that Richard Dodd really said to me maybe 6 months ago. Is just that you just sort of have to just treat it as it's all different.
Mm.
You don't expect
Like a
just
one
because
for one
one for
comparison.
one,
Yeah.
and then just sort of like go into it with an open mind, and just sort of and do that. The gain structure is different.
Mm-hmm.
The modern music is loud, and
Yeah.
and in the computer you can make music loud much easier than you can on a console. So there's that advantage, but it's also very easy in the box to overdo it
Mm-hmm.
and kind of make a mess very quickly, and like do too much of that work in one particular area, like your mix bus, or Not like in the analog world, you accumulate loudness with parallel compression, and it's like an accumulation of sound, and you sort of need to take that into the digital world. The analog world is not more romantic. I mean, some people romanticize it, but it's raw. It's full of compromises and difficulties.
I mean, you're talking about some of the differences. Like if you're opening up an in the box mix now, and you're going to do it all in the box, you mentioned gain structure being different than analog, and I think that's huge. And I think that's one thing that I'm trying to bring to the attention of the readers a lot is, a lot of, let's say they're even reading a magazine on like how to appropriately gain their mixes. It's from maybe an analog worldview, and so they're trying to do that in the box, and it doesn't quite work the same because just converters don't sound good when you just blast them. So when you're doing an in the box mix now, maybe talk through like gain structure. What does that mean? Like when you pull up a fresh mix, how do you approach it knowing I need to get the levels where it's going to sound good digitally? What do you do?
Well, I mean, I use some of the, like on the mix bus, I use some of the same indicators that I would in an analog world. I use, currently my mix bus consists of like a GM-LEQ that feeds a UA audio, the 33609, and I set up the 33609 in the box the same as I would in the analog world. I turn the threshold all the way up, and fastest release time, lowest ratio of compression, and I get the mix to just sort of start to move the meter a little bit and compress. I have like a Pultec EQ after that, and then sometimes I use a tape emulation. I use that right now. I'm using the UA ATR. And I look for it's just like the first thing I do to sort of establish gain structure is like I kind of set like my kick drum level. It's just like like I want to see it around -3 on the VU meter, and I'm looking on the tape machine. It's just like, am I getting the compressor to kick in a little bit on the kick drum? Yeah, it's starting to work. Then I look at the VUs on the tape machine. It's like it's peaking about -3. And now this is an average. It's not a law. It's just like I just kind of making sure I'm in the ballpark. And then I turn the bass on, and then when the bass and the kick drum are hitting together, I should get peaks around 0. And then I know that, well, okay, I'm not working my compressor too hard, and I'm getting this VU meter up to about 0. And because I know that as I continue to add things, it's going to even get louder.
Right, and that tape machine is probably like 4th in line on your mix bus. You're saying so you're
yes. Yeah.
So it's sort of showing you the volume after it hit the compressor.
Exactly.
And okay.
And then I also have a gain stage. It's like if I'm, I might, there's all kinds of places where you can kind of like change the gain structure. One important thing is not, but like all my drums, I'm talking about drums and bass. All my drums are going through a bus, that has EQ, and then there's parallel compression on both of those. Make sure that I'm not like overloading those buses. Before I send them on down to the mix bus. Yes, sometimes they clip a little bit, but a little bit of clipping is okay in the digital world to a degree. It begins to have a sound, but just sort of like, but I start there because start there and sort of monitor along the way. And now, but what I also like to do is I like to try to set my kick drum fader at 0. Okay. And then, because I'm going to use a plugin on there, I'm going to use some kind of EQ plugin or, maybe an SSL channel strip or something. If setting the fader at 0 is not loud enough or too loud, I'll go in the plugin and I'll adjust the internal level in the plugin. Because maybe if the track has been recorded too loud, it's hitting the front end of the plugin too much. Yeah. So I'll turn the input to the plugin down. Or if after I'm making some EQ changes, I don't have enough level at my 0 fader setting, I'll turn it up to where it's my gain structure is starting to get right. Part of the reason that I want the fader at 0 is it kind of creates a good overall fader level for the gain structure that I'm creating, because then I know from experience that if I have my kick drum kind of at 0 and I get it balanced internally correctly, and I do the sort of same thing on my vocal, that I can kind of make everything else fit. And then I also want my faders. I also want my faders up towards 0 so that the resolution is better.
Exactly.
You know, so instead of like if I have really hot guitar tracks, instead of turning the fader down to -15 and then trying to automate down in that really fine. That really fine resolution, or it's not so fine, I guess, just where it's really hard to make a subtle movement. And, you know, not only is the resolution not very good down there, but a little bit of movement, resolution in terms of like what the computer captures as automation and plays back, but, you know, just the amount of change you can, you know, make by just wiggling the fader. I want to get those things. So instead of having my guitars down at -15, I might go into the EQ plugin and take it down 9 decibels and bring the fader up those 9 dB, and then I'm at -6, and that sort of, you know, just kind of creating that stuff so that you're not just maxed out.
I want to zero in on the one thing you're talking about with the kick drum in case people missed it, because I know you've told me this before. To recap, you're looking at a VU meter on your mix bus, sort of like the last thing, and you're saying the first thing you'll pull up to sort of gauge level is the kick drum, and you ideally like that to be at 0, but if you pull that up and the VU meter is hitting at -3, let's say, then you bring the bass guitar up or the bass track so that now the two together are hitting -0 or hitting 0.
This this idea originally comes from Tom Dowd, who's a genius of the recorded history and modern recording techniques. So the first thing we need to realize is that a VU meter is the most sensitive to low frequencies.
Correct.
Okay, that's where we get the most, visual volume. Like if you look at a bass guitar on a VU meter, like if you were to balance a bass guitar and a hi-hat to where you think that they're sort of like an appropriate mix, and then you look at and you solo up only the bass and you look at the bass level, it's up there. It's around 0. You look at the hi-hat, it's loud enough, but it maybe only do maybe -20 or something.
Yeah.
So first of all, know that VU meters are really sensitive to low frequencies. Then the thing is when you have a kick drum, which is low frequency centric, it's part of your bottom end, and you have your bass guitar or bass element, those are sort of constitute a lot of the low end in a recording, let's say most of the time. When you have two things and you have them at equal volume, when you get 3 dB louder when you double the amplitude of something. So like if I was to have one kick drum and then add a second one, the same kick drum, same level, technically you're supposed to get about 3 dB more volume. So that's why I set the kick drum to -3 on its own. Then when I put in the bass, and I know that the bass is at the sort of the relatively the right level, it's sharing equal footing with the kick drum, then I'm going to get 3 dB more, and it's going to bring me up to 0.
Got it.
Now, like if I had the kick drum and it was peaking at -3, and I turned my bass on and it suddenly went up to +3, then I would think, oh wow, maybe I have too much bass, and it's also sort of acclimating yourself to the room. It's just like, wow, the bass doesn't sound as loud as it looks, but I know that rule of thumb as a basis is accurate. So if I then bring the bass level down to where it's like, oh, now it's at 0, and then I listen, it's like, okay, maybe this room is a little bass light, or my speakers or whatever. It helps you accomplish a lot of things. It's not just about setting the gain structure, but that's why I do that. It's because then I know that sort of have a basis of relationship between those two elements, and then I know I want my kick drum to hit the compressor just a tiny bit, and make it move a little bit, because in modern music the kick drum is kind of one of the things that kind of like gets the compressor, the mix bus compressor going a little bit. Does that, did I?
No, that's great. I appreciate. I wanted to tease that out a bit for people. And that last reason you said was brilliant. I mean, you had mentioned this, last year at Mixed with the Masters, is you're like, look, I'm in a room. I don't know this room, so this sort of trick helps me know, is my bass level at an appropriate level in this room? Because maybe I'm not familiar with how this room produces bass. So that's really practical for people watching, that maybe even to learn their room and their speakers a little bit, because we can get fooled into saying, yeah, this sounds great. in this room, but in the rest of
Right.
the world, maybe it doesn't, which is always the bane of the home studio land. So that's super, super helpful. So then maybe briefly walk me through, like you spend time on the kick and the bass, and that's making sense.
Hmm.
Then do you build the rest of the mix out based around that? Or you said you mentioned the vocal, do you look at the vocal level too? Or do you bring the
Well,
vocal in
it's
early or
just like,
late?
man, I mean, I basically, I just spend a few minutes kind of doing that. Really,
Yeah.
it's far less to actually do than once you're familiar with it than it does to actually explain
Yes.
it. But so you just kind of like you check that, and then kind of turn things back on, and then just sort of see. Yeah, I mean, I want then the vocal needs to be at an appropriate level, and then I sort of quickly, you know, I'll probably actually listen to everything and kind of get familiar before I really start to attack the gain structure, and then yeah, probably I'll have the vocalist, like you got to make sure that it's sort of at the right level, and then because then guitars and whatever else, it's just like I kind of try to mix, put everything in there and just sort of just whatever's saying to me, hey, like pay attention to me. I go do that. It's just like maybe I get my kick and bass thing sort of going to where I feel like I have that basis set, and then I turn everything on, and it's just like the guitars are really loud and the vocals really quiet. It's just like, oh, okay. It's like, okay, well, first of all, I'll turn the vocal back off so I'm not distracted by that, and I'll bring my guitars down into the
Hmm.
world of like, okay, where I
Makes sense.
trust that it's like they should, now that I know that my bass and my kick drum I'm getting good gain structure and there's a good relationship between them. I'll put them at a level where I think is appropriate for that interaction, and then I'll turn my vocal back on, and it's like, okay, I got to turn this vocal up. I got to figure out why this vocal's not loud enough, or what I need to do to get the vocal, and then sort of, But yeah, I mean, the bottom end and the vocal, typically in music, are the things that you kind of have to sort of set the stage with, and you kind of fill the rest in. And then I just sort of pay attention to. Um, just pay attention to whatever's sort of raising its hand,
Yeah.
and sort of saying, hey, hey, take a look at me. And, and I also spend a little bit of time, like oftentimes when I sit down and start a mix, I just spend a little bit of time just doing some like familiarizing myself. I just kind of listen to everything in, and I maybe like look around at the tracks, and I maybe clean up some edits, and I just get my mind sort of focused on, hey, I'm here in front of the session. I'm kind of listening. I'm doing these things, and I just kind of let some of it just kind of come to me subconsciously, because sometimes it takes a second for our ears to sort of acclimate.
Hmm.
So because maybe you've been outside, or maybe you've been on the phone, and your brain is interpreting sounds a certain way, or you've been in a different room and you come into this room
Yeah.
that has its sound, and you kind of just need a minute to just sort of like get focused. And by sort of doing other things in the session, um, uh, I don't know, maybe, I look at, maybe is my bit depth set to 32-bit floating, what's my sample rate, making sure, just kind of like looking around and just sort of like hearing the song but not focusing on it, instead
Right.
of like the first thing I turn it on, it's just like maybe my ears tell me right away that like, oh wow, the vocal's way too loud. Well, maybe it is straight away in my
Right.
mind, but then as I
Because you're
sort of
focused on it. Yeah.
acclimate, it's just like, because I might end up doing something wrong to the vocal. It's just like give it a minute, like let it sink in, and then sort of react to it then.
Because when you listen for something, you'll hear what you're listening for, and sometimes you don't want to do that. You want to hear
It's a
what it
classic
actually
case
is.
of switching something in and out and thinking it's actually doing something when it's not, and you're like the placebo effect. It's just
Yeah,
like
dude, man, that EQ sounds so sweet on that guitar. Yeah,
it's not
yeah, I've
supposed to
done
plug
that.
in, dude.
Yeah, I love that. I love that happens, because it's a very humbling thing. It's like, oh yeah, it really, in some ways, it doesn't matter, because if you like it, then it was good.
Exactly.
Now that you're in the box, like in terms of printing mixes, do you still print in real time to a track, or do you do the offline bounce now?
I still print in real time. I haven't experimented enough with the offline balance, and I guess just over past experience, over the history of the technology developing, I know it not to be. It has in the past has not been as good. I can't
Sure.
comment on what it is now. I also like to print in real time because it gives me that feeling of I sit there and listen to the print go
Yeah.
down, and sometimes I stop it 2 or 3 times to change
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
because it's that same phenomena of when someone walks into the room they come and visit you in the studio, and you're playing something for an outsider for the first time. You hear it differently.
Yeah.
It's like it creates a different awareness, and so when I'm printing the mix, I'm aware that, hey, I'm printing what I'm going to send someone to listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and so it kind of like it switches something on a little bit different in my brain and my perception of it, and then you know,
That's
it
a
takes me
great
out of
point.
my sort of very micro focus.
Yeah. No, that's a huge point. I mean, I used to print all the time that way when Pro Tools could only do that really in real time. And then when Pro Tools 11 came out and you could now offline bounce and non-real time, I mean, a lot of DAWs already had that. I've been playing around with that, but you're right. What has not happened is I no longer get that last little opportunity to hear the mix differently psychologically. Like it was, because I would always stop it too, like, oh man, that is out of balance. You catch a couple different things, so you finally have your hands off,
Yeah,
and you're listening more like a listener, and that's the way it's going to be heard. It's almost like a hack to get your ears and your brain to hear your mix differently one last time, and that's where I think the value is. Even if it does print perfectly in offline bounces,
right.
is you don't get that opportunity to hear your mix differently and go, there might be one little thing that would make the difference.
Totally. I mean, it might be just, it might be one thing when the print gets to the bridge that you want to change.
Maybe to kind of wrap up a couple of questions here. One would be, for the guys and gals that are recording their own music that they're going to mix later, where really the mix is beginning way before the mixing phase. It's obviously beginning in the songwriting phase and the arrangement. I always say good arranging is good mixing. When you are tracking your own material, if you're taking an artist where you get to track them, I mean, like you did the Moon Taxi record, I love the sound of that record, but that was something you're like, I know I'm going to be able to record it and mix it. How does it change the way you record a band, and what things are in your head, what things should be in our heads as we're recording our own material that we know we will have to be the mix engineer for to make your job easier when you get to mixing?
Well, I mean, I guess my attitude about when I'm recording for myself as a mixer, I guess in some ways I take a little bit more chance in terms of like not providing myself too much flexibility, because I want to make decisions and make my job as a mixer easier. I want to commit to things, commit to a sound, try to build the sound that I want to have at mix, as opposed to leaving myself a bunch of decisions to make. When I'm recording for someone else, when I'm recording and I know that someone else will mix, perhaps I might do things slightly different. I might provide a DI instead of only putting the keyboard through an amp.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that I don't record a DI for myself sometimes, as a safety measure, or just like if I want to revisit the sound or whatever. But I think that the most important thing to me is, and I guess it's the same in both scenarios, is just as much as you possibly can, make as many decisions as you can before you get to mixing, so that you're building your recording to sound like it should. And mixing really should be about like bringing out the best in everything, and just sort of like final organization. Now, sure, do I make some small arrangement choices and changes in the mix, because then I can really hear everything? It's just like, like yesterday I was doing a mix, and there was a B3 in every chorus. And this song is, this song is like, it's a long song. It's not a typical pop format. It's almost like a folk format, where you have a verse and then you have like a musical interlude and then another verse. And so you end up with these like 5 chorus sections, essentially. And it's like, I don't want to hear the B3. I have it in all of them. So I just turned it off for the first 2. It's like, let the song develop. So you make decisions like that.
I think what's typical if you're newer to recording, and when I got into recording, is you think of things compartmentalized. You think, okay, good drum sound, good guitar sound, good bass sound, as opposed to how is this drum sound going to work with that bass tone and that vocalist for this style of a song. And that's harder for us to do, is to be able to have that big picture view. So when you're recording, like how do you keep all those things in mind, and do you change the technique on the drums if you know it's going to fit better with a bass guitar, and how do you get to that point, I guess, to think about those things the way you do?
Um, well, gosh, I mean, I try, and I know that it's not always possible, especially like if you're doing your own music. I try to record as many musicians and as components as I can at a time, so I have an understanding of what it is, what the big picture sounds like, and how it all does fit together. I mean, I guess I'd recommend if you're only going to be able to do things like sort of one at a time, then maybe something would help is to create a little bit more elaborate of a demo version of the song.
Mm-hmm.
Don't simply just start with the, a drum pass, you know, without really sort of maybe try, you know, maybe program some drums a little bit that sort of represents what you're going to do, and sort of the direction you're headed, and sort of like piece together like a multi-track demo of the song, so that you can then go through and then sort of replace the drums and sort of like up the sonic quality,
Yeah.
and then refine the parts and have a sense of the interaction. I always well, not always, but quite often what I do is I also kind of create in pre-production kind of create some programming and loops just to sort of help with the feel and sort of understanding tempo and dynamics. I mean, I think if you're on your own, that's probably a good thing as much as possible. It's just like, and definitely have a vocal in there when you're
Yeah.
recording drums. Have a scratch version of the song, the best version of it you can, as just sort of like as a reference, so that you know maybe the drum pattern you're choosing really works appropriately with the voice, and that the dynamic is appropriate. You know, some
Yeah.
music is not that dynamic. Some of it's just like all full on and raging the whole time, and that's all fine. I guess those are some of the things I would say. I mean, what it is, I just kind of go on my instincts and experience,
Yeah.
and you know, and that's really only something you can accumulate over time. I can't really give any prescription or a formula for it, but just try and surround yourself with as much information as you can, and try to make the most, and within that context, try to make the most pointed and decisive decisions that you can, and commit. Yeah, because you know, maybe you record your drums, bass, guitar, and then you get to vocals, and you realize, man, I kind of missed it on the bass sound.
Mm.
And I would rather, instead of like leaving myself a bunch of latitude to sort of like, okay, I'll rework the bass. If I can't make the bass work that I recorded, then I should just re-record it. But
Mm.
you know, really commit to, like, if I want a certain sound on the bass, you know, if I want to have reverb on the bass, which can be a really cool thing, put the, you know, it's like put a reverb pedal on it, put it through the amp, and record it that way.
Yeah.
It's like, in making that commitment, I can't take the reverb off of it necessarily. I mean, there's techniques that you can minimize it, but then maybe down the road I figure out that, well, the reverb that I want to use for the vocal presentation is sort of very muddied with what the bass reverb choices that I made. Well, if I can't fix that, well then I'm helping the vocal execution by knowing that I want the bass to have reverb on it, but then I might have to go back and revise it. But I'd rather do that than print a clean bass and just do simple, like, you know, effect plug-in reverb or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't really feel like I'm going to get as committed of a sound. I'm not going to be like, my hand won't be forced by the fact that, well, I know I can go and change that forever.
Yeah.
Then I'm not really building something.
That's huge. I mean, that's something that I find is really not the ethos of the modern home recording, project studio recording mindset. That's actually like viewed as weakness. Is to like, why would you ever want to back yourself into a corner, and why would you ever want to commit to a sound? And it's like praise. The opposite is praise. Like, I have a, you know, unlimited undo, and I have DIs of every guitar part, and I have the, and to me, not only does it sound exhausting and mind numbing to make those decisions later if you are the one that has to mix it, but there's something you were saying, at least the way you were describing it is there's more joy and more satisfaction actually creating a sound on recording day than what the opposite is, or the alternative, I suppose, is just capturing a performance that can be
Right.
manipulated later, and that's very different.
It's in that scenario, I don't hear any joy in the process.
No.
I don't hear an inspired moment in the beginning, and I don't hear an easy job in the end. It all just it sounds uninspired in the beginning and fatiguing in the end. It's just like, get excited and do something crazy in the beginning, and like
Yeah.
create something. And the thing is like what you create in that time and space, because you can't really change it that much. It dictates everything that happens after it, and it
Mm-hmm.
becomes even more unique because sometimes you kind of do paint yourself into a corner, and you have to wrestle with it, and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of relationship and journey that you have to take, you can only arrive at your destination having brought all that with you by making certain other decisions and following other paths, and then it becomes something actually more unique and special, and I mean, it's just like there is a certain sort of a feeling of conviction and adrenaline and excitement, and by committing to something. But that's why, I mean, I think that's why some people are really enamored by the whole recording analog on an 8-track, with a
Yeah.
few mics, because it is risky, and
Yes.
it is kind of dirty and dangerous, and you get what you get, and you just sort of move on. But some of the most amazing music that we've all been inspired by was made that way,
Yeah.
and it's just like when the Beatles were recording on 4 tracks, or whoever, and the drum take was like on its third bounce. They're starting to lose the snare drum because the
Yeah.
high end's kind of going away from all. So what do? They like put a really loud, they put another snare drum over the top of it, or they put a tambourine over top of it to give you the backbeat. And then if you listen to music, like music that was being made at that day, it's just like that's part of the reason why the drums sound so small and crappy and in the background. And then sometimes there's this really exciting percussive part over the top of it, because
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out how to take along what they'd started with
Mm.
and keep it exciting, and that I'm not saying that's the reason that all tambourines are loud. They're
Right.
all loud on old music, but I mean, you
Yeah.
need to think about things like that, and it's just like, well, and we're all informed by all the music we've all heard.
Yeah.
It's just like that's what sounds right to us, because we've been conditioned to that's what's
Yeah.
right. Motown music. I mean, Motown, absolutely brilliant playing and arrangements. But that equipment was crazy. It's like half of it was homemade, plugged together, some of it mismatched. And that stuff is like, some of that stuff is really distorted, and the low end's kind of weird and big. And it just kind of like, but the thing is it is what it is. And it sounds kind of so cool. But really what it is the music is great. The playing's great. The emotion and the inspiration is in there. It's like kind of all happening in this little room, and they just work on it, work on it, work on it until they work on the songs and the performances and everything, until it was just like it hit this sweet spot. And then so it goes out in the world, and we all love it because of that work that was put into it. And
Yeah.
but the sound of it is, we've been conditioned to think, well, that's the sound of what that is. And then when
Mm-hmm.
people kind of try to copy that music,
Mm-hmm.
they stylize the sound towards that, because that's what we've been conditioned to think is right. So it's
Right.
I mean, it's whatever, it's like it's
Yeah.
whatever. Make something unique, and then it will inspire others. What people chase is like a unique sounding record. They don't chase a normal sound, like a very middle of the
Mm.
road sounding record. They put on the polarizing things. It's like, wow, I mean, check that out,
Yeah.
and then it's like, well, how do I do that?
Yeah.
So just do it.
No, I love it. And Dave Pensado once said it's better to sound new than to sound good. And and what I think you're saying, Jacquire, is so cool. I really appreciate even the excitement in your voice towards the end. Is like music? Would you say is like all about relationships? You've got the relationship of the song to the arrangement to the performance, and then now in the engineering space, what we're all into is like, how do you get it to sound great? It's not really a clinical thing as much as it is, well, does it have a cool relationship? Does the sound of the bass that you'd made relate to the vocal and the drums, and do they work together? They all affect each other, and thinking that they don't is sort of like, it's like foolishness. Like they can't all be compartmentalized. They all just, for better or for worse, affect each other,
Mhm.
and you get something at the end. And that something shouldn't be the same cookie cutter something that you're trying to recreate. It should be something new and exciting and enjoyable every single time, and it will be different because everything informs everything, and it becomes this jambalaya of whatever.
Exactly. Use the spices at hand to make your jambalaya.
Oh, this has been great, man. I know I've taken more of your time than I said I would.
Well, that's all good.
I hope the people that have been watching this have gotten a sense of like, man, it's so much about the music again. And if you're inspired by the music you're making yourself or the artist that you're working with, really cool artists, either way, if you're not excited about the music, you're not going to get a great recording. But if you are excited, let that excitement of the song or something special about the song dictate what you do. And I like how you said, be risky, do something crazy in the recording phase. Don't be so afraid of screwing up a sound. Just actually push into it. And that's one thing, even seeing you work and mix with the masters, even watching the way you worked from the recording end of things and your sort of brain working to even the automation when you're mixing and doing some automation, seeing you like sweat, like working, like you just were so into the song. And in those moments, it reminded me again of just like, if you're not into the song and you're not thinking like a musician, then you're not going to do great work. It's so much about buying into that moment of that song, whether it's just a hook or the whole song. And it's just an honor to sort of watch you work and see your headspace. I love it. It's very inspiring.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. I mean, I think we should all try to, like I think I said to you in that moment, mixing. It's like that's a performance. That's the time as a technician where you really get to become part of the performance. And I mean, you may not think it's the greatest song in the world, but it's just like tap your foot, get into it, and feel it, and make make it move. And yeah, I mean, I'm very appreciative of the time, and yeah, it's been an honor. It's really, really cool. I like talking about this stuff. I love what you're doing, and it's and all that you've shared with your viewers and readers. It's really important. It's it's refreshing. It's inspiring. You're inspired. You inspire me. So
wow, I'm humbled, man. Thank you for the time. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Keep up the good work, and maybe we can have you again some other time in the future.
I would love it. If there's questions that come up from this, or there's other things that kind of get identified that we can talk about, I'd love to get back on and do it.
Yeah, I've definitely done follow-up videos. That'd be great. So thanks for the offer. I'll take you up on it, man. I hope you have a fantastic day.
You as well, buddy.
Thanks, bud.